I'm going to tell you a story about a dog. Not just any dog, but a working dog. A canine named Gunner, and I'm going to tell you about the strangest thing I ever saw him do, a thing that happened every single night without fail for months after we got home. Now, when I say home, I mean back to the States. We had just finished up a deployment that felt like it lasted a lifetime, and frankly, both Gunner and I were pretty worn out. You hear people talk about transitioning back to civilian life and you picture parades and barbecues. The reality is, it's mostly just quiet. A deafening, overwhelming quiet. My name is Jake, and I live down here in North Carolina, just outside Wilmington. It's humid, it's green, and the loudest thing most days is the breeze rattling the screen door. That was a stark contrast to where we'd been, where quiet usually meant something bad was about to happen. Gunner was, and still is, my shadow. 110 pounds of highly trained, muscle-bound German Shepherd. He was bred for this job, smart, relentless, and possessing a kind of focus I could only dream of. We had been partners for 4 years. He wasn't a pet. He was my brother in armor. He saved my life 3 times, maybe 4 if you count that time I tried to eat MRE chili that had definitely gone bad. When we finally got the paperwork cleared and I brought him home for good. The military letting him retire with me, which was a fight, let me tell you. I thought the hardest part was over. I thought we were done with the missions, the checkpoints, and the constant vigilance. We settled into this old ranch house my grandfather left me. It's nothing fancy, just a simple layout. Kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, and a small laundry room off the back that leads to the mudroom. It smelled like cedar and old books, and it felt safe. That's all I needed. For the first few days, Gunner was just adapting. He wasn't barking at the mailman, which was a relief, but he was jumpy. Every time a car backfired down the street, he'd snap his head up, eyes wide, looking for my command. He'd pace the perimeter of the backyard like he was clearing a compound. I got it. I was doing the same thing internally. We were both just waiting for the next order that wasn't going to come. I figured routine was the key to settling us both down. We'd wake up, run 3 miles, eat breakfast, and I'd spend the day doing mundane things. Fixing the leaky faucet, trying to figure out how to work the smart TV. Gunner would usually sprawl out on the rug, sighing dramatically, the way only a working dog who believes he is now underemployed can sigh. But the night, man. The night was different. The first time it happened, I didn't think anything of it. It was maybe 4 days after we got back. I'd had a long day wrestling with the garden hose, and I was ready to crash. It was exactly 10:30 p.m. I remember the time because I was watching the local news weather report, hoping for clear skies for our morning run. I got up from the couch, stretched out the kinks in my back, and told Gunner, "All right, buddy, last call. Let's go out." Gunner, who normally springs up at the mere suggestion of an outdoor venture, just looked at me. He was lying right in the middle of the hallway between the living room and the kitchen. He was stretched out long, head resting on his paws. "Come on, Gunner," I repeated, heading toward the back of the house. He didn't move. He lifted his head maybe an inch, let out a low, guttural grumble. Not a warning growl, more like a complaint, and then put his head back, down. I laughed. "Oh, you're tired now, are you? Too good for the backyard, huh?" I walked past him, intending to go through the kitchen to the laundry room and then out the back door. That's when he moved. It wasn't a sudden, frantic dash. It was deliberate. He stood up slowly, stretched his massive body, and then walked 3 steps. 3 specific steps. He positioned himself directly in front of the doorway that leads from the kitchen into the laundry room. This was the doorway, mind you, that we used 20 times a day. It was just an ordinary wooden door, usually left open. Gunner stood there, facing into the laundry room, his back to me. He stood absolutely still, like a statue carved out of granite, his ears slightly forward. "What are you doing, big man?" I asked, walking up behind him. I reached out to grab his collar, thinking maybe he smelled a mouse or something. But before my fingers even touched the leather, he lowered himself. not into a playful bow and not into a relaxed sprawl. He lowered himself into a perfect textbook military resting posture. Belly flat to the floor, front paws straight out, head slightly raised, scanning. He was a barrier. I tried to step over him. "Gunner, move," I said, using the firm, low command tone we used in the field. He didn't budge. He didn't look at me. His focus was entirely on the dark, empty laundry room beyond the threshold. I tried again, nudging him gently with my foot, the way you might push a stubborn suitcase. "Come on, buddy, I need to get through." He let out that low, deep sound again, that rumbling complaint. It was clear. No. Passage denied. Now I'm the dominant figure in our partnership. He knows his commands and he knows the rules. When I say move, he moves. But in this moment, there was something in his posture that wasn't defiance. It was duty. It was the same look he had when he was guarding a vital piece of equipment or waiting for me to clear a dangerous corner. I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "You're being ridiculous." I ended up having to walk the long way around, through the dining room and the living room, to get to the front door, and then walk around the house outside to the back door to let him out. It was inconvenient, but I figured, okay, maybe he was just having a weird night. Maybe he was dreaming about a mission. Maybe the stress was manifesting in a strange way. I let him out, he did his business, and when we came back in, he walked right past that door and curled up on his rug like nothing happened. The next night I didn't think about it until it was time to turn in. I glanced at the clock, 10:28 p.m. I stood up and looked down the hall. Gunner was still on his rug. Good, I thought. Just a one-off. I took 2 steps toward the kitchen. Thump, thump, thump. Gunner was instantly on his feet. He trotted 3 steps, turned the corner into the kitchen, and positioned himself. 10:30 p.m. Right on the dot. He was back in the exact same spot in the exact same posture, blocking the exact same doorway. This time, I was annoyed. I wasn't just tired, I was getting frustrated. He was breaking protocol, and I needed to correct the behavior immediately before it became a habit. I walked right up to him. "Gunner, sit." Nothing. He didn't even twitch an ear. "Gunner, heel." Still nothing. His body was locked down. I got down on my knees, face level with him. I put my hand gently on his massive head. His fur was soft, but the muscle underneath was rigid. His eyes were focused, not on me, but past me, or maybe past the door he was guarding. "What are you doing, pal? There's nothing there. It's just the washing machine." I tried the gentle persuasion method. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a training treat, a piece of dried liver that he would normally sell his soul for. I held it right up to his nose. He sniffed it. He loves liver. He looked at the treat, then looked back at the doorway, then back at the treat. He let out a low, almost mournful whine. The canine, equivalent of, "I want it, boss, but I can't." He refused the treat. Gunner, who lives for food, refused a high-value treat to maintain his position. That told me this wasn't stubbornness. This was serious. I gave up for the night. Again, I had to walk the long way around the house feeling like an absolute idiot, being commanded by a dog who was guarding a doorway that led to laundry baskets and a water heater. The third night, I was ready. I set an alarm on my phone for 10:25 p.m. I wanted to beat him to the punch. When the alarm went off, I was already standing by the kitchen doorway. Gunner was resting nearby. I watched him. At 10:29 and 50 seconds, he stirred. He didn't look at me. He looked at the door. I put my hands on my hips. "Don't even think about it, buddy." 10:30 p.m. He stood up. He walked 3 steps. He moved with the precision of a trained dancer. And he lowered himself into the barrier position. I stood over him, my hands now crossed. "Listen to me, Gunner. That's a door. It's safe. There is nothing there." Release. Release was our command for him to drop whatever object he was holding or guarding. It should have worked. Instead, he did something new. He pressed his entire body harder against the floor, flattening himself out, making it impossible to step around him without physically tripping over him. His head turned slightly, and he glanced back at me, his eyes dark and serious, conveying a single, unmistakable message. "I am taking this post, Jake. Do not interfere." I stood there for a good 5 minutes, arguing with a highly trained German shepherd about the metaphysical danger posed by a Maytag washing machine. I tried to pull him by the collar. He resisted with the full force of his massive neck muscles. I could have dragged him, yes, but that would have meant forcing a high-stress confrontation, potentially damaging our trust, and, frankly, I didn't want to break the dog. He'd been through too much. So, I conceded. Again. I walked the long way around. Again. The next morning, I called my old handler, Sergeant Miller, who was retired and running a K-9 facility in Virginia. "Miller, it's Jake." "Jake, how's civilian life treating you, son? Gunner behaving?" "Well, that's why I called. He's weird. He's got this thing he does every night. Exactly 10:30 p.m., he blocks the same interior doorway." I explained the whole routine, the precision timing, the refusal of commands, the specific, flattened posture. Miller was silent for a moment. "He won't let you pass?" "No. He takes up a defensive perimeter. He looks like he's guarding the crown jewels, but it's just the entrance to the laundry room." Miller chuckled, but it sounded strained. "Well, that's Gunner. He was always rigid with his routine. Maybe he smells a pest colony in the wall, Jake. He's probably just being thorough. A pest colony that only moves at 10:30 p.m. and requires him to refuse liver treats? Come on, Miller. This feels like a mission profile." "Did you guys have a specific routine on deployment that corresponded with that time?" Miller asked. I thought back. Our deployment was mostly in a forward operating base, FOB, near Kandahar. Time meant nothing there except for when the shift change happened. No, nothing consistent. We were usually running patrols or standing watch, but never a fixed 10:30 p.m. event. Miller offered some generic advice. Try putting a calming scent on the door. Try exercising him harder right before that time, or just ignore it and see if he breaks the habit. I tried all of it. I ran Gunner so hard that afternoon that I thought he might collapse from exhaustion. He was panting heavily at 10:29 p.m., sprawled out, looking utterly defeated. 10:30 p.m. He staggered to his feet, walked 3 steps, and collapsed into his barrier position, panting heavily but fully alert. He was physically exhausted, but mentally he was on duty. The scent? I put a pheromone diffuser near the door. He just ignored the lavender smell and kept his position. Ignoring it, I tried just walking around him for a week, hoping he'd realize the mission was pointless. He didn't. He held the post until I went to bed, which was usually around midnight. Only when I was safely tucked away in my room did he finally stand down and come to lie at the foot of my bed. It became the most reliable thing in my life. Every night, 10:30 p.m., the laundry room door was sealed off by 100 pounds of faithful, silent muscle. I started, thinking about what might have caused it. Had he been trained to guard that specific type of doorway? No, that's ridiculous. Was it a specific sound? I sat in the living room one night with a sound meter. Nothing. The house was dead quiet. I was getting tired of the long walk around the house, but more than that, I was worried about Gunner. This wasn't healthy. This wasn't a dog adjusting. This was a dog responding to an invisible threat. I decided I needed to investigate the doorway itself. Maybe Miller was right about the pests, but if so, they were the quietest, most disciplined pests in North Carolina. One evening, around 9:00 p.m., an hour and a half before his routine started, I went into the laundry room. It was tiny, just enough space for the washer, the dryer, and a shelf with cleaning supplies. I pulled the washer out from the wall. I checked behind the dryer. I looked under. The sink. Nothing. No signs of rodents, no strange wiring, no hidden caches. It was just a boring, functional room. I stood in the doorway, exactly where Gunnar positioned himself. I looked out into the kitchen. From this position, he couldn't see the front door, he couldn't see the windows, and he couldn't see the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He was essentially guarding a supply closet. Why here? Why this specific spot? I sat down on the floor right next to the doorframe, leaning against the wall, trying to think like Gunnar. What is the primary function of this space? It's a bottleneck. It's the last interior threshold before the mudroom, which leads to the back deck. If someone wanted to get into the house quietly from the rear, they'd come through here. Okay, so he's guarding the rear entrance. That makes sense for a defensive posture. But why only at 10:30 p.m.? And why refuse? To stand down? I spent the next week talking to every veteran I knew who had worked with K9s. They all had similar stories about dogs being weird after deployment, chasing shadows, hating loud trucks, digging holes in the middle of the living room rug. But none of them had a story about a dog maintaining a rigid, timed defensive perimeter around an empty interior doorway. One friend, a guy named Rick who trained bomb dogs, suggested maybe it wasn't about the door, but about the light. Think about it, Jake. In a lot of those missions, the lighting changes at a certain time. Maybe the streetlights outside hit the kitchen window just right at 10:30, and it triggers a memory of a flare or a signal. It was a long shot, but I checked it out. The next night, 10 p.m., I went around the house and pulled all the curtains tight. I even turned off the porch light. The kitchen was pitch black. 10:30 p.m. Gunnar got up, walked 3 steps, took his position. The darkness didn't deter him. If anything, he seemed more tense. His silhouette, framed in the dark doorway, looked like a gargoyle. I was getting desperate. This wasn't just a quirk anymore. It was starting to feel like a psychological barrier for both of us. If I couldn't figure out why he was doing this, how could I help him move past it? He was stuck in a loop, reliving a moment I couldn't identify. One night, maybe a month into this routine, I decided to test his commitment fully. I was going to force him to move. I wasn't going to hurt him, but I was going to apply pressure until he broke the barrier. I walked up to him, put my hands on his hips, and started pushing gently but firmly. "Gunnar, move. Now." He braced himself. His paws scrabbled against the tile floor, trying to get purchase. He was low to the ground, a picture of resistance. He let out a deep, strained groan, but he held the line. I stopped pushing. I realized I was about to get into a literal tug-of-war with my combat partner over a laundry room. This was beneath us both. I stepped back, defeated. I looked down at him. His eyes, usually so bright and focused on me, were distant. He wasn't seeing the kitchen floor. He was seeing something else entirely. "What is it, buddy?" whispered. "What are you waiting for?" I went to bed that night feeling a deep sense of failure. I had brought him home to safety, but I hadn't brought him home to peace. He was still fighting a war, and the enemy was hiding behind the washing machine. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve. If the answer wasn't in the house, it had to be in the memory. I needed to go back to the source. I pulled out the old deployment logs. These were not the official military records, but my own personal journals, the things I wrote down every night to keep my head straight. I started flipping through them, looking for any mention of a specific mission, a specific incident, or a specific time that might tie into 10:30 p.m., military time, which would be 22:30. I scanned entries about patrols, about IED discoveries, about the long, boring stretches of guard duty. Nothing jumped out. Then I reached an entry from about 8 months into the deployment. It was written in a shaky hand, shorter than the others. It was dated October 14th. The entry was simple, almost cryptic. 22:30. Perimeter breach. Lost Sing. Singh, Specialist Singh. He was a good kid, fresh out of basic, assigned to our unit for perimeter watch. He was killed by a mortar strike, but that was earlier in the year. This entry was different. I read it again. 22:30. Perimeter breach. Lost Singh. I remembered the night vaguely, but the details were fuzzy. It had been bad. I called Miller again, waking him up on a Saturday morning. Miller, October 14th. Do you remember that night? The one where Singh got hit? Singh? Yeah, I remember. Hell of a night. We were pulling security on the north gate, right? That was the night the compound took a lot of incoming. No, Miller, that was earlier. This was later. October 14th. My log says perimeter breach, lost Singh. What the hell does lost Singh mean? Miller went quiet for a long time. I could hear him shuffling papers on his end. Jake, that wasn't a good night. Singh wasn't killed by a mortar, not exactly. He was on watch outside the secondary comm shack. That shack, remember? It had the reinforced back door. It led out toward the old supply yard. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. The comms shack. It was a critical point, always guarded. They hit the perimeter hard that night, Jake. Real hard. They managed to break the wire near the supply yard. Singh was the first line of defense. They got to him before he could even raise the alarm fully. And Gunner? I asked, my voice tight. Where was Gunner? Miller paused. Gunner was with you, Jake. You were running interference, sweeping the interior buildings for secondary teams. You were moving from building to building, clearing them, working your way back to the breach point. I gripped the phone tighter. I was starting to remember the chaos. The adrenaline had blurred everything, but the fear was still there. Do you remember the last building you cleared before you got to the comms shack? Miller asked softly. I closed my eyes, picturing the layout of the fob. The dust, the burning oil smell, the muzzle flashes. Yes, the old maintenance shed. It was right next to the comms shack. We went in, cleared it, and then we had to move across a small open courtyard to reach the comms building. Miller finished the thought for me. And what was the specific instruction for Gunner right before you went into that open courtyard? My heart started pounding. I remembered the exact moment. We were pinned down behind a stack of sandbags. The air was thick with smoke and gunfire. I told him to hold position, I whispered. I told him to guard the last cleared doorway, to make sure no one flanked us from the rear while I crossed the open ground. Miller confirmed it. That's right. You told him to hold the threshold of the maintenance shed door. You told him to keep that door secure until you gave him the all clear or until you returned. And then what happened? Then the situation escalated fast, Jake. You crossed the courtyard, found Singh, and the whole area went hot. You didn't get back to the maintenance shed for almost 45 minutes. You never gave him the all clear. I hung up the phone slowly, the implications crashing down on me like a physical weight. Gunner had been left on duty. He had been given a direct, critical, life-or-death command. Hold this door. And Gunner, being the perfect soldier he was, held it. He held it through the firefight, through the evacuation of the wounded, through the entire night. He held it until I finally came back for him, exhausted and covered in dust, and simply led him away without a word, because the adrenaline had wiped my memory of that specific instruction. Gunner had spent 45 minutes guarding a door, waiting for an enemy that never came, waiting for a command that was never issued. 45 minutes of perfect focus in the middle of a war zone. Now, think about that. That memory is not just a passing thought for him, it's a core directive. I looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. 10 Hanru a.m. I realized why he was blocking the laundry room door. The dimensions of my laundry room doorway, the way the light hit the floor, the smell of the old wood. It must have been a near-perfect analog for the maintenance shed door back in Kandahar. And the time. 10:30 p.m. 22:30. That was the exact moment I gave the command. The moment the mission started. Gunner wasn't acting weird. He wasn't having a PTSD episode. He was executing an order. He was completing a mission I had forgotten to end. He was waiting for the all clear. That night, I didn't wait for 10:30 p.m. I sat on the floor of the kitchen, leaning against the wall, watching Gunnar chew on a bone, about an hour before his scheduled guard duty. At 10:29 p.m., I saw him stir. He dropped the bone. His eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on the laundry room door. 10:30 p.m. He stood up. He walked the 3 steps, turned, and started to lower himself into position. But this time, I was ready. As his chest touched the cool tile floor, I didn't yell, I didn't command. I spoke softly, using the exact tone I used when we were safe, secured, and the mission was truly over. "Gunnar," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mission complete. All clear." He froze. His body was half lowered, suspended between duty and rest. He slowly turned his massive head and looked at me. His eyes were searching, questioning. He was checking my face for confirmation. I nodded slowly, holding his gaze. "Mission complete, buddy. Stand down. It's over." I waited, holding my breath. I had to get this right. If I messed up this moment, he might lock into this behavior forever. He held the position for maybe 10 more seconds. Then, slowly, with a massive shudder that ran through his whole body, he unfolded himself. He stood up straight, shook himself once, and let out the deepest, longest sigh I had ever heard from him, a sound of profound relief. He walked away from the doorway, turned around, and came straight over to me. He put his massive head in my lap, nudging my hand until I rubbed behind his ears. He was done. The perimeter was secure. The mission was finally over. That was the last time Gunnar ever blocked that doorway. From that night on, 10:30 p.m. was just 10:30 p.m. It was time for a final chew toy and lights out. But that wasn't the end of the story, because while I was relieved that the mystery was solved, I still had one fundamental question that kept me up at night. Why had he been so fiercely protective of that doorway on October 14th, the night Singh was killed? Why was that command, "Hold this door," so vital that he would carry it across an ocean and through months of peacetime? That answer I wouldn't find out until much, much later, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my partner. The reason Gunnar was blocking that door wasn't just to complete an old mission. It was because he knew exactly what was on the other side. It felt like I had taken a 1,000-pound weight off both our shoulders. The next morning, Gunnar was a different dog. He didn't just walk past the laundry room door, he ignored it entirely. He stretched out on the living room rug, belly up, letting out little sleepy groans that sounded like pure contentment. He was finally retired. I was relieved, yeah, but the relief was overshadowed by a crushing sense of guilt. For months, I had been annoyed and frustrated by his behavior, treating it like a quirk, when all along he was just trying to do the job I had failed to relieve him from. I had left him holding the line, literally, for 4 years. But the larger question remained, scratching at the back of my mind. Why that door? Why the maintenance shed door in Kandahar? Miller's information was great for the timing. 10:30 p.m. was the command time, and the posture. He was guarding my flank. But it didn't explain the urgency, the sheer, absolute refusal to move, even when I offered liver treats. This wasn't just about completing an order. This felt like guarding a secret, a terrible secret. I needed the full picture of that night, October 14th. My logs were too brief, too focused on my own actions. I needed the operational reports, the detailed after-action review, AAR, that mapped out every casualty and every tactical decision. Getting military paperwork, especially sensitive. Operational details from a few years back is like trying to pull teeth from a shark. It's impossible. So, I went through the back channels. I called Miller again, and he put me in touch with a guy named Sergeant Ramirez, who used to work in our unit's intelligence section. Ramirez was now a civilian contractor running a security firm in El Paso, but he still had contacts. I told Ramirez the whole story, Gunner's nightly ritual, the missions, complete command, and my need to understand the perimeter breach that cost us Singh. Ramirez was sympathetic. "Jake, man, I remember that night. It was chaos. We locked down the reports tight because of what happened to Singh. It wasn't clean." "I know it wasn't clean," I pressed, "but I need to know the layout. Specifically, where was that maintenance shed door relative to where Singh was standing watch?" Ramirez couldn't send me official maps, but he did me a solid. He described the area in painstaking detail, pulling the memory from his head like he was walking the ground again. "Okay, picture this," Ramirez explained over the phone. "The comms shack is the main target, right? That's where Singh was. It's got 2 main walls facing the perimeter and a reinforced back door that leads into a narrow space. We called it the trench. That trench runs maybe 20 feet and then hits the wall of the maintenance shed. I pictured it. The maintenance shed was a long, rectangular building used for spare generators and vehicle parts. Your door, the one you put Gunner on," Ramirez continued, his voice dropping, "was the only door on that side of the shed. If anyone came through that trench, past the comms shack, they'd be able to hit your flank, or worse, they could use that shed door to get inside and pop up behind. Anyone defending the comms shack." It clicked into place. I hadn't just told Gunner to guard the door. I had told him to guard the critical choke point. If Gunner failed, the enemy would have been behind me, behind Miller, behind everyone trying to secure the breach. So, when I crossed the courtyard to get to Singh, I was completely exposed, I muttered. "You were a sitting duck, Jake. You know that. Gunner was the only thing keeping the enemy from pouring into that alley and cutting off your retreat. He was the anchor." Now I understood the level of duty. Gunner wasn't just guarding my flank, he was securing the safety of the entire immediate team. That command was literally life-saving. But here was the sickening part. Singh was killed right outside the comms shack, just on the other side of that 20-foot trench from Gunner's post. I asked Ramirez the hardest question. "Did Gunner see it?" Ramirez hesitated. "I don't know, Jake. But he heard it. Everyone heard it. It was loud, close-quarters fighting. Singh didn't go down easy." I hung up, feeling sick. Gunner, the most loyal creature on Earth, had been placed at a critical vantage point, ordered not to move, and forced to listen as his comrade was overwhelmed, maybe even fighting his last fight just out of his line of sight. Imagine the conflict in that dog. His training. It screamed, defend, attack, neutralize the threat. But the command from his partner, the ultimate authority, was hold this door, do not move. That explains why he refused the treat. That explains the intensity. It wasn't just about completing an assignment. It was about honoring the one command that, in his mind, prevented total disaster, even if it meant sacrificing a comrade. He knew the cost of failure. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to reconcile the war dog with the sleeping giant at my feet. I watched Gunner, now peaceful, and wondered what those 45 minutes of holding the line had done to his head. Then I started comparing the maintenance shed to my laundry room again. I went back and forth, staring at the doorway. Maintenance. Shed. Concrete floor, wooden door frame, smelled like diesel and dust. My laundry room. Tile floor, wooden door frame, smelled like Tide and fabric softener. Tactically, they were both bottlenecks leading to a rear exit. But was there anything else? Something that could trigger the memory beyond the time and the shape of the doorway? I went into the laundry room and started pulling things apart again. I moved the washer, the dryer, the storage shelf. I was looking for anything that smelled like Kandahar, anything that looked out of place. I noticed the water heater. It was an old model sitting in the corner. When it kicked on, it made a low, humming, persistent sound. I stood there, listening to the hum. It was a familiar sound, the kind of white noise you tune out until it stops. Then I remembered the maintenance shed. What was in there? Spare parts, tools, and a massive diesel-powered emergency generator that ran constantly during the day and often cycled on and off at night. I walked over to the water heater and put my hand on the casing. It was warm, vibrating slightly. The sound was a low, steady thrum, a vibration you felt more than you heard. Could that be it? The low, mechanical hum of the water heater, an innocuous noise in North Carolina, perfectly mimicking the constant thrumming of the emergency generator back at the fob? I checked the clock. It was 4:00 p.m. The water heater was running its cycle. Gunnar, asleep in the living room, wasn't reacting. The sound itself wasn't the trigger. The trigger was the command time, 10:30 p.m. I realized I was thinking too narrowly. I was looking for a single sensory trigger. But Gunnar's memory, his operational trigger, wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of elements converging at that specific moment. 1. The exact time the adrenaline spiked, 22:30. 2. The specific shape and position of the doorway, the bottleneck. 3. The background, noise, the low hum of the generator, water heater. 4. The scent of the old wood and dust, the shed. All of these factors created a perfect sensory echo of the maintenance shed door. But if Gunnar was just reacting to a sensory loop, why the absolute unyielding defense? Why was he so certain that the danger was still present, even after months of nothing happening? I went back to Ramirez, who had promised to keep digging through archived communications. Ramirez, I need to know about the enemy. The guys who breached the perimeter. Did we capture any of them? Did we recover anything? We recovered some equipment, Jake. Nothing major. They were professionals. Cleaned up their tracks quickly. What about the guy who hit Singh? Was he identified? Was he neutralized? Ramirez sighed heavily. This is the part they didn't put in the public report, Jake. Singh was killed by a single attacker operating alone, who came through the wire with surgical precision. The rest of the breach team was just diversionary fire. This was new information. A single attacker? And he got away? Yes, he got Singh. He planted a small device, a comms jammer, in the comms shack, and he disappeared back into the night before we could lock down the perimeter completely. That's why the higher-ups were so angry. We lost a man, and the attacker escaped. I felt a chill run down my spine, even in the humid Carolina air. So, Gunnar wasn't just guarding against a general threat. He was guarding against a specific, highly trained individual who was known to evade capture. Exactly, Ramirez confirmed. And that guy knew the layout. He knew that Trench was the fastest way out after he planted the jammer. Now, I understood Gunnar's perspective. He was placed at the escape route. His job was to intercept the specific ghost who had killed Singh. In Gunnar's mind, the mission wasn't complete until that specific threat was neutralized, or until I, his handler, explicitly told him the target was cleared. And I hadn't. I had just dragged him away in the fog of war. This realization changed everything. Gunnar wasn't suffering from generalized trauma. He was holding a post for a specific, dangerous enemy. I started thinking about the geography of my ranch house again, comparing it to the FOB layout. If the laundry room door was the maintenance shed door, the escape route, then what was the rest of the layout? The mudroom, beyond the laundry room, led to the back deck. That would be the supply yard dock open area where the breach occurred. The kitchen was the courtyard I had to cross, and the comms shack, where Singh was killed, that would be just off to the side of the mudroom, right? Hidden from view by the angle of the wall. Wait a minute. I walked to the laundry room, stood in the kitchen, and looked at the door. I traced the line of sight. The laundry room led into the mudroom. The mudroom was small, maybe 5 feet by 6 feet, with a small window and the back door, If the laundry room door was the maintenance shed door, then the trench, the alley where the attacker escaped, would be running right through the mudroom. I walked into the mudroom. It was just a place for muddy boots and raincoats. But I looked at the small window. It was high up, usually covered by a cheap curtain. I pulled the curtain aside. It looked out onto the side of the house toward the neighbors' overgrown flower beds. Nothing exciting, but the light. When the street lights came on, or when the moon was right, that window cast a long, narrow beam of light across the mudroom floor, creating a shadow that ran right toward the back door. I suddenly remembered a tiny, almost insignificant detail from the operational report Ramirez had sent me, a detail I had skimmed over because it seemed irrelevant. The attacker was only visible for a few seconds as he crossed the beam of light from the damaged floodlight near the supply yard. The attacker was a shadow, a flicker of movement in a specific beam of light. And what time was that sighting recorded? 22 to 31. Exactly 1 minute after I gave Gunnar the command to hold the door. Gunnar, pinned down behind the maintenance shed door, would have been directly facing the trench. He might not have seen Singh fall, but he would have seen the attacker dart across the light beam just yards away, right as the chaos peaked. The last thing Gunnar saw before I pulled him away was the uncaptured enemy escaping, right past his post. He wasn't just guarding the door, he was waiting for the return of the ghost. I finally understood the full gravity of the situation, and it made my skin crawl. Gunnar wasn't protecting me from a hypothetical threat. He was protecting the house from a known entity that, in his experience, only appeared at 10:30 p.m., and who was known to use that escape route. The mission was simple: block the exit. Wait for the target to show. I had given him the all clear, which resolved the command issue. But the psychological imprint of the actual threat, the specific ghost he saw escaping, that was still there. I had told him the mission was over, but I hadn't addressed the target. I needed to make sure Gunnar knew that the specific threat was gone. I called Miller again, just to talk through it. Miller, I figured it out. It wasn't just the command, it was the ghost. The guy who killed Singh, he escaped right past Gunnar's post. Gunnar saw him. Miller was quiet. I wish I could say that's the end of it, Jake. But there's one more thing about that night. Something I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered in peacetime. What is it? When you put Gunnar on that door, you were covering your own flank, yes. But the reason you were pinned down for 45 minutes wasn't just the fighting. It was because the enemy had planted a small, delayed action explosive near the comms shack. Not a huge bomb, Jake, just enough to cause a distraction and slow us down. I remember the explosion, I said, my voice hoarse. It went off right when we finally secured Singh. Right, but listen to me. That explosive wasn't meant to kill everyone. It was designed to hit the secondary response teams. It was placed right at the entrance to the trench, about 10 feet from Gunnar's post. Miller paused, letting the information sink in. When you ordered him to hold the door, you saved his life, Jake. If he had pursued the attacker, or moved even 5 feet outside that doorway, he would have been right in the blast radius of that secondary device. I leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling lightheaded. Gunnar hadn't just been holding the line. He had been standing 10 feet away from a bomb, ordered not to move. He knew it was. There, Jake, Miller said softly. Gunnar was a bomb dog. He would have scented it. He would have known the danger he was standing next to. Suddenly, the refusal to move, the low, guttural whine, the rigid posture, it all made terrifying sense. Gunnar wasn't just refusing to break an order, he was standing exactly where he was told, knowing that moving meant certain death, or at the very least, catastrophic failure to hold the critical choke point. He was the perfect soldier, holding a post between an escaping killer and a hidden explosive. But I still couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was one more piece. If the danger was gone, why was the laundry room door still the perfect analog? I had given the all clear and he stopped blocking the door, but the memory was still there, dormant. I went back to the mudroom one last time, looking for that final, specific link. I stood where Gunnar would have looked if he were on duty, staring out through the small, high window. The window was usually dark, but tonight the moon was bright, and the light streamed in, cutting that familiar narrow beam across the floor. I noticed something under the small shelf where I kept the cleaning rags. A sliver of wood, painted a faded, sickly green. It looked like a piece of trim that had broken off the door frame years ago and been kicked under the shelf. I bent down and picked it up. It was heavy, old cedar. But what caught my eye wasn't the wood itself, but the smell. It didn't smell like pine or dust. It smelled faintly metallic, like old engine oil and something else, something acrid. I realized what it was. My grandfather, who owned the house before me, had been an amateur mechanic. He used to store old engine parts and oil cans in the mudroom. This piece of trim must have absorbed the scent over decades. And the maintenance shed in Kandahar? It was full of diesel, oil, and generator grease. The smell was identical. The combination was perfect. The time, the shape of the door, the low hum of the water heater, the sight of the shadow crossing the light beam, and now the specific, pungent smell of old engine oil. Gunnar wasn't just guarding a doorway, he was guarding the scent memory of the place where he was forced to choose duty over his instinct to protect. I had relieved him of his post, but I hadn't relieved him of his personal failure to save Singh, or his fear of the escaping ghost. I knew I needed to talk to Gunnar one more time, not as a handler to a dog, but as a partner to a soldier. I needed to address the ghost. I waited until the next evening, around 9 p.m. Gunnar was resting nearby. I walked into the mudroom, picked up that old piece of oil-soaked cedar trim, and brought it into the kitchen. I sat on the floor and called Gunnar over. He came immediately, curious. I held the wood up to his nose. He sniffed it, his nostrils flaring, recognizing the deep, complex scent that had been a part of his war life. His body tensed slightly, readying for the mission. I looked him straight in the eye. I used a calm, conversational tone, the kind of tone I'd use talking to another, human, about a painful memory. "Gunnar," I started, rubbing the wood gently. "October 14th, you held the line, you did your job, the target, the ghost, he didn't come back. He's gone." I paused, letting the words sink in. I knew he understood the intent, if not the specific vocabulary. I had to make the connection tangible. I took the piece of wood, the last physical anchor to that specific moment of duty and danger, and I walked out to the backyard. Gunnar followed, watching me intently. I walked to the fire pit, dropped the wood in, and struck a match. The old cedar caught quickly, smelling sharp and chemical as the oil burned off. Gunnar stood next to me, watching the flames. He didn't bark, he didn't whine. He just watched the physical manifestation of his 4-year-long mission turn to ash and smoke. As the last piece of wood disintegrated, I put my hand on his head. "Mission complete, Gunnar. Target neutralized. It's done." He leaned into my hand, and for the first time since he came home, I felt the deep, bone-weary tension finally drain out of him completely. He didn't need the command, "all clear," anymore. He needed closure. That should have been the end of the story. The brave dog, haunted by a wartime command, finally finds peace. But like I said, there was one more layer to the mystery. A layer that Gunnar knew all along, but I, the supposedly intelligent human, was too slow to grasp. The reason Gunnar was so fiercely protective of that escape route, the reason he stood between the bomb and the ghost, wasn't just duty. It was a secret he had kept hidden for 4 years, and that secret was waiting for me. Not in the old deployment reports, but right here, in North Carolina, tucked away in the very house we thought was safe. It started a few weeks after. The wood was burned when the house finally felt quiet, and the 10:30 p.m. routine was a distant memory. I was fixing a leaky pipe in the mudroom sink, right next to the famed laundry room door. The pipe was backed up, and I had to remove a section of the old copper tubing. As I wrestled with the wrench, a small, rolled-up piece of paper, yellowed and stiff, fell out of the pipe and landed on the floor. I picked it up, expecting it to be old, gunked-up plumbing tape. But it wasn't. It was paper, meticulously rolled into a tight cylinder and sealed with what looked like dried mud. It was a note, and it was addressed to me. I unrolled it carefully, feeling a sudden cold dread that had nothing to do with plumbing. The handwriting was neat, almost military in its precision. The note simply said, "Jake, 2230. The door is the key. Don't let him take it." There was no signature, but the paper wasn't old. It was crisp. It hadn't been in the pipe for decades. It had been placed there recently, and it used military time, 22:30. The ghost wasn't gone. He was closer than I thought. And Gunnar hadn't been guarding a memory. He had been guarding a warning. I stared at the note in my hand. It wasn't plumbing tape. It was crisp paper, folded tight, smelling faintly of the same old oil and dust I'd smelled on the trim I just burned. Jake, 22:30. The door is the key. Don't let him take it. I felt the blood drain right out of my face. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the wrench. This wasn't history. This wasn't PTSD. This was right now. The note was recent. The ink was fresh. Someone had been in my house, or at least in the crawlspace or yard, recently enough to slip this into the pipe. And they knew my name. They knew the time of the incident, 22:30. And they knew that the laundry room door, the one Gunnar had been so diligently guarding, was critical. And the phrase, "Don't let him take it." The ghost, the attacker who killed Singh and escaped. He wasn't a memory. He was a problem that had followed me 3,000 miles across an ocean and waited 4 years to show up on my doorstep in North Carolina. I looked at Gunnar, who was now resting peacefully in the kitchen, oblivious to the terror gripping me. I had told him, mission complete, all clear, and he had stood down. But he hadn't stood down because the threat was gone. He stood down because his handler finally gave the correct verbal command, allowing him to rest his body. Even if his mind knew the danger was still circling, he was guarding the door because the threat was real. He knew the ghost was coming back for whatever was hidden here. I scrambled up from the floor, my knees protesting, and stumbled into the kitchen. I showed the note to Gunnar. I held it right under his nose. "Do you know this, buddy? Is this why?" Gunnar sniffed the paper. His ears snapped forward. He didn't growl, but his entire body went rigid, the same tension I'd felt when I tried to nudge him off his post. He looked from the paper to the laundry room door, then back to me, his eyes wide and demanding. "Yes, boss. This is why. This is the danger." I realized I hadn't solved Gunnar's problem. I'd simply given him permission to take a break from the guard shift. Now I was officially on duty. I grabbed my phone and called Ramirez immediately. It was late afternoon in North Carolina, which meant mid-afternoon in El Paso. Ramirez answered on the second ring, probably expecting a follow-up question about the maintenance shed layout. "Ramirez, stop everything. Listen to this. I found a note, hidden in a pipe in my mudroom." I read him the note, word for word. There was a long silence on the line, much heavier than before. "Jake, are you sure? Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I wish. It's here. It's real. And it uses 2230. Nobody outside of our immediate operational circle knows that time marker." Ramirez swore under his breath, a long, rough string of Spanish and English. Okay. This changes everything, Jake. This means the ghost isn't just haunting you. He's actively hunting something you have, or something he thinks you know about." "He thinks it's behind the door Gunnar was guarding," I said, my voice tight. "The note says, the door is the key." "What the hell does that mean?" It means the ghost didn't escape that night empty-handed, but he didn't get what he was looking for either. He hit Singh, planted the jammer, and then he was looking for something specific in that maintenance shed, or right next to it, and Gunnar was blocking the only entry point. So, what was he looking for? We never knew, Jake. We assumed he was just gathering intel, but if he's following you home 4 years later, it's high value. Something that connects to his handlers. Something that could blow his whole network wide open. Ramirez's voice took on a new, urgent quality. Listen, you need to assume that note was placed by an ally, someone warning you. But the ghost knows the note is there, or he knows you're close to finding whatever he wants. So, what do I do? First, you get out of the house, now. Take Gunnar and leave. I looked around my grandfather's old ranch house. It was full of memories, sure, but it was also the only place Gunnar and I had ever felt safe since coming back. Leaving felt like giving up the high ground. No, Ramirez. If he wants. What's here? I'm not running. He'll just follow. I need to find whatever the key is, and I need to do it before 10:30 tonight. Jake, you're talking about engaging a Tier 1 operative who killed a Marine and evaded an entire FOB. You are retired. You don't have a team. I have Gunnar, I stated simply. Ramirez sighed, defeated. He knew that tone. Fine, but if you're staying, you need to move fast. Go back to that door, tear the room apart. Look for anything that doesn't belong. False walls, loose panels, anything that mimics the layout of the maintenance shed. I hung up and went straight back to the laundry room. I'd already searched for pests and structural damage. Now, I was looking for a secret compartment. I started with the doorframe itself. I ran my hands along the old cedar, tapping and pressing. Nothing. I moved to the wall behind the washing machine. It was drywall, thin and unremarkable. I pushed hard. It gave slightly. I grabbed a utility knife from the shelf and cut a small square out of the drywall, right where the wall met the floor, hidden by the washing machine's bulk. The drywall came away easily, revealing not insulation, but a small, shallow cavity lined with thin sheet metal. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Inside the cavity, nestled in a bed of desiccated insulation and old, oily dust, the same dust Gunnar had smelled, was a small, sealed, hard plastic case, maybe the size of a deck of cards. It was military issue, designed to be waterproof and heat-resistant. I pulled it out. It was cold and heavy. Gunnar, who had followed me, was standing right behind me. He wasn't relaxed anymore. He was vibrating with controlled energy, his eyes glued to the plastic case. I opened it. Inside, wrapped in anti-static foam, was a single, tiny, solid-state data chip. It looked like a high-capacity flash drive, but it was coated with military identification markings. The key, I breathed. This wasn't just intel, this was probably the mother lode. Whatever was on this chip was important enough for a professional killer to risk crossing continents and breaking into my house. I looked at Gunnar. This is what you were guarding, isn't it? Not the door, but the secret behind the door. Gunnar let out a sharp, single bark, a confirmation. He hadn't been blocking the doorway to complete an old order. He had been blocking the doorway to prevent the ghost from accessing his prize. Gunnar had been on active duty for 4 years, and I hadn't even known the war was still going on. The guilt was overwhelming, but there was no time for sentiment. The threat was imminent. I pocketed the chip. I had to assume the ghost knew I had found it. The note was either a warning or a taunt, but the clock was ticking down to 10:30 p.m. I spent the next hour transforming the house from a cozy retirement home into a defensible position. It wasn't much, but I did what I could. I locked and barricaded the windows. I moved the heavy oak dining table in front of the front door. I checked my grandfather's old hunting rifle, making sure it was clean and loaded. Gunnar stayed right by my side. He moved with a purpose I hadn't seen since we were overseas. Silent, efficient, and always checking the perimeter. I called Ramirez back, my voice low. I found it, a data chip, military grade, hidden in the wall behind the washer. Ramirez let out a whistle. I knew it. That maintenance shed was used for emergency communications backup. That chip must contain the operational data they were trying to steal that night. Jake, you need to get that chip to a secure facility, now. No time. It's 8 p.m. here. He's coming tonight. If the ghost knows I have it, running only puts people on the road at risk. I'm going to hold the line right here. Ramirez grew serious. Listen to me, Jake. If this guy's tracking you, he's not going to come through the front door. He's going to use the escape route, the maintenance shed analog. He's coming through the mudroom. I know, I said grimly, and Gunnar and I will be waiting. Ramirez gave me a few tactical pointers. Keep the lights off, listen for the dog, and whatever I did, don't let him get close to Gunnar. If he knows the dog saw him, he'll prioritize neutralizing Gunnar first. K9s are too dangerous and too reliable. The advice was brutal, but necessary. Gunnar was my shield, but he was also a target. I moved our staging area from the living room to the kitchen. The kitchen offered the best sightlines toward the mudroom door, and the tile floor meant Gunnar could get better purchase if he needed to engage. I sat down on the floor, leaning against the counter, rifle across my lap. Gunnar lay beside me, his head up, facing the deadly doorway. It was 9:30 p.m. The house was absolutely silent, a silence far more terrifying than the chaos of Kandahar. In the war zone, silence meant an attack was imminent. Here, it meant the enemy was already inside the wire. I thought about the note again. Who wrote it? Why warn me? I realized the note had been placed in the plumbing before. I burned the oil-soaked wood and gave Gunnar the all clear. That means the person who wrote the note expected Gunnar to still be blocking the door. They were trying to tell me why Gunnar was acting that way, because they knew I was struggling to understand. Maybe the ghost wasn't alone. Maybe there was a third party involved, someone who was trying to stop the ghost and who knew Gunnar was the only reliable guard. The minutes dragged by like lead weights. I kept checking the clock, 9:45 p.m., 10:50 p.m. Gunnar was a study in stillness. He didn't pace, he didn't whine. He just breathed, slow and deep, his eyes fixed on the threshold. At 10:15 p.m., I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, it was a subtle, almost musical ping. It came from the backyard. I didn't move. Gunnar's ears twitched violently. He let out a low internal vibration, a warning growl that never left his chest. "Easy, buddy," I whispered, resting my hand on his shoulder. I strained my ears. The sound was too clean to be an animal. It sounded like metal hitting metal, very softly, like a small climbing hook tapping against the aluminum siding of the house. The ghost wasn't entering through the door. He was ascending to the mudroom window, the analog to the beam of light where Gunnar first saw him escape. He was using the high ground. I realized I had been focused too much on the door itself. The door was the key to the hiding spot, but the window was the entry point for the attacker. I gripped the rifle tighter. I had to wait until he was fully inside. If I fired through the window, I might miss, and I'd lose the element of surprise. 10:25 p.m. The silence returned, thick and oppressive. He had reached the window. He was waiting. He was waiting for 10:30 p.m. He knew the time. He knew that at 22:30, the chaos began. He was timing his entry to the exact moment the original mission started, probably hoping to trigger my PTSD or Gunnar's routine and catch us off guard. I glanced at Gunnar. He was still fixed on the doorway, but his focus was now shifting. He was listening to the sounds, coming from the mudroom. 10:29 p.m. I heard the faint, almost imperceptible sound of glass cutting. The ghost was using a diamond cutter to remove the pane silently. Professional. At 10:30 p.m., exactly on the dot, the small pane of glass was gently suctioned away. A sliver of moonlight sliced into the mudroom, illuminating the space just enough for me to see the outline of the window. A shadow appeared in the opening, followed by the faint scrape of a boot as he eased himself through the narrow frame. He was in the mudroom. Gunnar didn't move yet. He was waiting for my command, but his body was coiled tight, ready to spring. The ghost landed softly on the mudroom floor. He was wearing dark tactical gear, silent and efficient. He carried a small pack, probably containing tools for accessing the door cavity. He paused, scanning the dark room, his eyes adjusting. He took one step toward the laundry room door, the door that led to his prize. That was my moment. I raised the rifle, aimed at the center of the mudroom doorway, and flicked the safety off. The click was loud in the silence. "Freeze!" I yelled, my voice rough and cracking from the tension. "Hands where I can see them." The ghost didn't freeze. He reacted with blinding speed. Instead of turning toward me, he dropped low, rolled behind the washing machine, and disappeared into the tiny space of the laundry room. He wasn't running, he was going for the chip. He knew exactly where the hiding spot was. "Gunnar, engage!" I roared. This wasn't a warning. This was the command he had been waiting 4 years to hear. Gunnar launched himself across the kitchen floor. He didn't hesitate. He shot through the laundry room doorway, disappearing into the darkness of the small room, 100 pounds of muscle and fury targeting the intruder. The sounds that erupted from the laundry room were sickening. A rapid, violent clash of heavy bodies, a sharp, choked cry that was instantly muffled, and the heavy thud of Gunnar's massive paws scrambling for purchase. The washing machine rattled violently against the wall. I couldn't shoot. Gunnar was too close. I had to rely on my partner. I lunged forward using the counter for cover and peered around the doorway. The laundry room was a swirling mess of shadows and movement. I saw the ghost struggling violently. He wasn't armed with a firearm, but he was fighting with a lethal skill, trying to get his hands around Gunnar's throat. Gunnar had him pinned. His jaws weren't locked yet, but he was using his weight and speed to dominate the confined space, driving the ghost backward into the wall. The ghost managed to grab a laundry basket full of cleaning supplies and threw it blindly, hoping to hit Gunnar. It slammed into the wall, sending bottles and boxes flying. Then I saw the flash. Not a muzzle flash, but a metallic glint. The ghost had pulled a knife, a short, vicious blade, and was trying to stab Gunnar in the flank. "Gunnar, break!" I yelled, knowing the knife was too close. But Gunnar was trained to neutralize. He ignored the knife, shifted his weight, and with a terrible, satisfying crunch, his jaws locked down on the ghost's knife arm right above the elbow. The ghost screamed, a sound of pure, agonizing pain, and the knife clattered onto the tile floor. I rushed in, rifle still aimed, ready to put a stop to it. But Gunnar had already done the job. The ghost was writhing, pinned, his arm likely shattered, his face contorted in defeat. I kicked the knife away and trained the rifle on his chest. "It's over," I said, breathing hard. Gunnar held the bite, waiting for the release command. He was panting, a thin line of blood on his muzzle, but his eyes were clear and focused. I used my free hand to find the light switch. The sudden glare illuminated the small room, showing the destruction. Overturned laundry detergent, a dented washing machine, and the figure of the ghost, defeated. He was a slender man, hard-faced, with eyes that held a cold, professional rage. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him immediately. "Release!" I commanded Gunnar. Gunnar immediately let go, stepping back 2 feet, but remaining in a low, ready stance, guarding the downed man. I kept the rifle steady. "Who sent you?" The ghost just spat blood onto the floor. "You're the one who killed Singh," I accused. He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "He was in the way, just like you are now." I called the police, keeping the rifle trained and Gunnar alert. The local police response time in Wilmington is usually slow, but I emphasized the nature of the intruder: armed, professional, and dangerous. While we waited, I examined Gunnar. He had a few scrapes, but the knife hadn't connected. His training, his speed, and his sheer determination had saved him. The ghost, however, was in bad shape. His arm was definitely broken, maybe more. As I waited, holding the rifle, I finally placed the face. I had seen his picture once in a highly classified briefing slide about international intelligence targets. He wasn't just a hired gun, he was high level, a ghost in the truest sense of the word. The police arrived, sirens distant at first, then suddenly loud and blinding in my driveway. I met them at the front door, shouting instructions, ensuring they knew the threat was contained and the dog was friendly, but still on high alert. It took 3 officers to subdue and cuff the ghost, who resisted even with a shattered arm. They found no other weapons besides the knife. They found the climbing gear by the mudroom window. I handed the data chip over to the lead officer, explaining it was highly sensitive military intelligence. He looked at the tiny chip, then at the destruction in my laundry room, then back at me and Gunnar, and wisely decided not to ask too many questions. He called the FBI and military liaison immediately. By 2 a.m., the house was swarming with federal agents and military contractors, led by a surprisingly awake and grim-faced Ramirez, who had driven straight from El Paso. Ramirez looked at the damage, then at Gunnar, who was now calmly drinking from his water bowl. He held the door, Ramirez stated simply. He held the line, Ramirez. He knew the threat was still active. The command "all clear" worked for the trauma, but the threat assessment was always paramount. Ramirez shook his head, looking at the spot where the ghost had been pinned. Jake, you saved a lot more than your own life tonight. That chip, it contains the names of every asset this guy and his network ran in the Middle East. This is the key to shutting down a major operation. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me. I had just fought a war in my laundry room. Later, after the scene was cleared, the reports were filed and the washing machine was stabilized. Ramirez and I sat on my front porch watching the North Carolina sunrise. We still don't know who wrote the note, Jake, Ramirez said, sipping a lukewarm coffee. Someone warned you. Someone knew the ghost was coming for the key and knew that Gunnar's routine was the only thing standing in his way. The note writer might have been someone from the ghost's own side, I mused. Someone who got cold feet and wanted to stop him, but couldn't come forward. Ramirez nodded. Maybe, but we need to know for sure. The fact that the note used the exact time, 22:30, means they were there too. I looked at the laundry room door, now just an ordinary wooden door again. The threat was truly gone this time, but the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle still hadn't clicked into place. Gunnar had been guarding the door for 4 years. He knew the ghost was coming back. He knew the ghost was dangerous. He knew the exact time. But why the specific, unyielding refusal to move, even when I tried to pull him away? I thought back to that night in Kandahar. I'd ordered him to hold the door. I had saved his life from the bomb. He had seen the ghost escape. But there was one final chilling reason for his absolute devotion to that specific post. A reason that went beyond duty, beyond the key, and beyond even the ghost. I finally remembered the full sequence of events that night, right before I gave the command. It wasn't just about flanking protection. It was about something I had forgotten in the adrenaline rush. I stood up and walked over to Gunnar, who was sleeping now, finally at peace, his head resting on his paws. I knelt beside him, stroking his massive head. You weren't just guarding the chip, were you, buddy? I whispered. You were guarding him. I remembered the brief moment we were pinned down behind the sandbags, right before I sent Gunnar to the door. We weren't alone. Specialist Singh had been with us, running back from the comms shack, wounded, trying to make it to cover. Singh couldn't move further. He was bleeding badly. In the chaos, I had made a split-second decision. I had shoved Singh into the maintenance shed doorway, right, where Gunnar would later take up his post. I hadn't just ordered Gunnar to hold this door. I had ordered him to hold this door and guard Singh. Singh was alive when I left him. I put Gunnar on guard, telling him to secure the door and protect the wounded man inside. Then the situation escalated. I crossed the courtyard looking for help, and that secondary explosive went off. Singh was killed by the blast, even though he was inside the shed, right behind Gunnar's position. The report was confused, but the explosion happened right after Gunnar took his post. Gunnar, the bomb dog, felt the blast, and he saw the ghost escape. He was guarding Singh, who was killed right behind him, just moments after I gave the command. Gunnar's mission wasn't to guard a piece of intel, or to follow a routine. Gunnar was guarding the last place he saw his partner alive, and he held that line, unmoving, because he was protecting the dead, hoping against hope that I would come back and confirm that the man he was sworn to protect was finally safe. The laundry room door wasn't the escape route. It was the final resting place, the silent grave marker. Gunnar had been holding a 4-year vigil for a fallen comrade, ordered not to move, even as the enemy slipped away. I finally understood the weight of his duty. I looked down at the dog who had carried that burden for so long, and I realized that the greatest warrior I knew wasn't the one who charged the enemy, but the one who stood still, guarding the fallen, until his commanding officer finally came back to say, "Mission complete, it's over." Now, it truly was over. The ghost was captured, the key was secured, and the vigil was honored. We were finally home. Now, it truly was over. The ghost was captured, the key was secured, and the vigil was honored. We were finally home. The dawn broke over North Carolina, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, a stark contrast to the harsh, fluorescent glare of the military debriefing that had just wrapped up in my living room. Ramirez was still there, sitting on the porch swing, nursing a coffee that was probably colder than the night air. The feds had taken the ghost, the chip, and most of my front yard as a temporary crime scene. The house was a mess. The mudroom was dusted with forensic powder, the laundry room door was splintered where the washing machine had rattled against the frame, and the kitchen floor still showed the faint, dark stain where the ghost had spat blood. But for the first time in 4 years, the air felt clean. The tension was gone. Ramirez looked at me, his eyes tired but clear. "You know, Jake, I've seen some things. But watching a retired K-9 run a counterinsurgency operation in a suburban laundry room? That's a new one." I managed a weak smile. He just needed the right command, and the right target. "And the right motivation," Ramirez added, finishing his coffee. "Singh." I nodded, the name hanging heavy between us. "That's the piece I missed for 4 years. I thought I left him holding a door to protect my flank. I did, but I also left him guarding a man who was dying 10 feet away, a man he was explicitly ordered to protect. The reports were muddy on Singh's death," Ramirez admitted. "The initial AAR said he was hit by mortar fire earlier, but the refined reports showed the secondary blast got him, the one near the trench entrance, the same blast that would have vaporized Gunnar if he'd broken position." "He knew it was there," I whispered, the guilt still a knot in my stomach. Gunnar knew he was standing next to a bomb, and he was ordered not to move. He was ordered to protect Singh. He honored both commands even though they contradicted his primary instinct to locate and neutralize the explosive threat. It was the ultimate test of a working dog, loyalty versus self-preservation, and loyalty won. He stood sentinel, knowing he couldn't save his comrade, but determined to honor the post until I returned. Ramirez stood up, stretching. "Well, he saved you, Jake, twice. Once from the bomb, by holding his position and keeping the enemy focused on the comms shack, and again last night, by keeping that key safe." We shook hands. Ramirez promised to keep me updated on the ghost and the chip, but we both knew the real work was done. He drove away, leaving me alone with the quiet aftermath. I walked back inside. Gunnar was stretched out on his favorite rug, not pacing, not twitching, but truly asleep. He was snoring softly, a deep, rumbling sound of utter relaxation. I knelt beside him and gently ran my hand over the scar tissue on his muzzle, the subtle marks he'd picked up over years of service. I didn't need to give him another command. I didn't need to burn anything else. I just needed to talk to him, to finally acknowledge the truth of his burden. "I'm so sorry, buddy," I murmured, my voice thick. "I put you through hell. You didn't fail. Sing. You did everything right. Now you can finally rest." He didn't wake up, but he let out a heavy sigh, the kind that deflates the lungs completely, and nudged his head into my leg. It felt like an acceptance. The vigil was over, and the grief was shared. Over the next few weeks, the true adjustment began. The physical damage to the house was easily fixed. I replaced the washing machine, patched the drywall, and put a brand new, solid wooden door on the laundry room. A door that was now just a door. But the change in Gunnar was the real repair work. The 10:30 p.m. deadline vanished entirely. It wasn't just that he stopped blocking the doorway, he stopped reacting to the time altogether. One night, I set an alarm just to observe him. At 10:30 p.m., the house was silent. Gunnar was on the couch, a privilege he had definitely earned, his head resting on a pillow, watching me. Watch TV. He didn't even twitch an ear. The constant low-level vigilance that had plagued him since we got home melted away. He stopped pacing the backyard perimeter like he was clearing a compound. Instead, he discovered the joy of simple, aimless exploration, sniffing flowers, chasing butterflies, and arguing with squirrels. He started playing like a regular dog. He had never been much for toys. Everything was a tool or a target. Now, he'd grab a tennis ball and demand a game of fetch with a relentless, goofy enthusiasm that was entirely new. He was no longer a soldier on perpetual standby. He was a very large, very happy German shepherd enjoying his retirement package. My own transition was smoother now that the core mystery was solved. I stopped looking over my shoulder. The captured ghost and the secured chip meant the war had officially, finally, ended on my doorstep. I stopped, sleeping with the hunting rifle by my bed. I started doing things I hadn't had the mental space for in years. I got a part-time job tutoring high school history, mundane, low-stakes work that required zero tactical awareness. I started dating again, meeting a local woman named Sarah who worked at the library. She loved Gunnar instantly, not as a hero, but as a big, gentle, slightly clumsy dog who needed his ears scratched. Sarah was the first person I told the full story to. Weeks later, sitting out on the back deck while Gunnar patrolled the perimeter for errant garden gnomes. I told her about Kandahar, about the 2230 command, about the chip, the ghost, and the final brutal truth about Singh. She listened quietly, her hand resting on my arm. When I finished, she didn't romanticize it. She just looked at Gunnar, who was lumbering back toward us, tail wagging. "He carried that guilt, didn't he?" she asked softly. He was holding post for a memory of failure, because he thought he failed to protect the man, even though he was ordered to stay put. "Exactly," I said. He needed me to tell him he was relieved, not just of the post, but of the guilt. It took me 4 years and a near-death experience to figure that out. The hardest part about the whole ordeal wasn't fighting the ghost. It was realizing that the most powerful form of trauma for a working dog isn't fear, but the inability to fulfill a sacred duty. Gunnar's distress wasn't about danger, it was about integrity. We settled into a rhythm. The days were filled with long walks on the beach, trips to the dog park, where Gunnar, despite his size, was surprisingly polite, and quiet evenings watching bad television. The only lingering strangeness involved the mudroom, and it was entirely my doing. I had fixed the drywall, but I never put the washing machine back exactly where it was. I left a small, deliberate gap between the machine and the wall. It was my way of signaling that the hiding spot was exposed, the danger was gone, and there was nothing left to guard. One afternoon, a few months later, I was cleaning out the mudroom, moving some old boxes. I found a heavy, old, leather-bound book tucked away on a high shelf, a collection of my grandfather's fishing stories. I hadn't looked at it in years. I opened it, and a small folded piece of paper fluttered out. It was the same yellowed paper, the same crisp texture as the note I found in the pipe, but this one was tucked neatly into the spine of the book. I unfolded it, my heart jumping into my throat again, even though I knew the danger was gone. This note was different. It wasn't a warning. It was a single sentence, written in the same neat, military hand. He honored the oath. Thank you for listening to him. And this time there was a signature. Not a name, but a symbol. A simple hand-drawn outline of a dog tag. I looked at the note, then at Gunnar, who was asleep in the doorway, perfectly relaxed. The note in the pipe was a warning from an ally. Someone who knew the ghost's plan and knew Gunnar was the only thing stopping him. This second note, tucked away in my grandfather's book, was a thank you. It had to be the same person who placed the first note. Someone who had been watching, someone who had seen me struggling, and someone who had witnessed the final confrontation, someone who knew the importance of Gunnar's duty. The note writer was still out there, an unknown ally who had risked everything to save both of us. I called Ramirez one last time, reading him the new note and describing the symbol. Ramirez was quiet for a moment. A dog tag symbol. Jake, that's not standard military, but I've seen it once. It was the unofficial marking used by a very small, very specialized unit of K9 handlers who ran deep cover operations. They worked entirely off the grid. They were known for being fiercely loyal to their dogs, sometimes more than their country. So, someone who knew Gunnar, I concluded. Someone who was involved in the original operation, and who knew what was on that chip. Likely, Ramirez agreed. And someone who knew Gunnar wasn't just guarding a door, but a fallen comrade. They knew Gunnar's true mission. I realized then that the note writer might have been the one who placed the chip in the wall in the first place, using the maintenance shed as a temporary dead drop before the situation went sideways on October 14th. They might have been the one who put Singh with us, hoping for protection. The ghost wasn't just after the chip. He was after the person who hid it, the person who was now trying to help me. But the note writer was gone, leaving only gratitude and a sense of quiet closure. I folded the second note and tucked it into my own wallet. It was a reminder that even in the quiet of civilian life, the bonds forged in combat never truly break. Life settled into the deep, comfortable groove of routine. Gunnar and I had our mornings, our 3-mile runs, now more of a leisurely jog, and our afternoons spent soaking up the Carolina sun. The greatest measure of our peace came one evening, about 6 months after the confrontation. Sarah was over and we were making dinner. I needed a specific spice from the shelf in the laundry room. I walked toward the doorway, the one Gunnar had guarded for so long. Gunnar was lying on the kitchen rug, chewing a synthetic bone, entirely relaxed. I reached the threshold, stepped over it, and went into the laundry room. It was unremarkable. I grabbed the spice jar. As I turned to come back out, I stopped. Gunnar hadn't moved. He was still chewing his bone. He was completely, utterly unconcerned with the doorway, the laundry machine, or the mudroom beyond. But as I stepped back into the kitchen, his head lifted slightly. He looked at me, then looked past me, toward the laundry room door. It wasn't a look of panic or duty. It was a look of pure canine judgment. He let out a low, soft whine, the sound of a dog who is genuinely annoyed. He dropped his bone, stood up slowly, and walked over to the laundry room doorway. He didn't take the barrier posture. Instead, he reached out a massive paw and nudged the door gently, pushing it closed with a soft thud. Then he looked back at me, walked back to his rug, picked up his bone, and flopped down with a dramatic, heavy sigh. I stood there, holding the spice jar, bewildered. Sarah, who had witnessed the whole thing, started laughing softly. "What was that?" I shook my head, smiling. I think he was telling me to close the door. We live in North Carolina, Jake. We're running the air conditioning. Stop letting the cold air out." Gunnar wasn't guarding the perimeter anymore. He was enforcing the energy, efficiency of the house. The K9 bomb dog, the silent sentinel of Kandahar, was now a retired gentleman worried about the electric bill. The warrior had finally become the family dog. The mission was truly complete. And that, my friends, is how a military K9 taught me the difference between duty and peace, all because I forgot to close a door on a mission 4 years too late. But, as peaceful as things were, the truth about the note writer, the silent ally who knew everything, always lingered in the back of my mind. It was the last unsolved thread, and it led me to wonder, if someone was watching Gunnar so closely, did they know something else about the night Singh died? Something even more personal than the bomb or the ghost? I hadn't found the answer in the logs, or in the reports, or in the walls of my house. I realized that if I wanted the final piece of closure, I would have to go back to the source, to the only person who knew the full story of October 14th. I had to talk to Singh's family, not to tell them how he died, but to ask them about how he lived, and why Gunnar's final, desperate act was to stand guard over his memory. I found Specialist Singh's parents living in Arizona. I wrote them a long letter explaining who I was, who Gunnar was, and asking if I could visit. I didn't mention the ghost or the chip, just the shared history of our deployment and the need to honor their son's memory. They agreed. A month later, Gunnar and I were on a plane, heading west. It was the longest trip Gunnar had taken since his retirement, and he handled the plane ride with the stoic boredom of a seasoned traveler. When we arrived at the Singh family home, it was a quiet, unassuming place in the desert suburbs. Mr. and Mrs. Singh met us at the door. They were kind, gentle people, deeply scarred by their loss, but welcoming. I introduced them to Gunnar, who, sensing their grief, acted with a quiet reverence I had never seen from him. He simply sat beside Mrs. Singh, letting her stroke his massive head, offering silent comfort. We talked for hours about their son, sharing stories of his youth, his dreams, and his brief, brilliant time in the service. Finally, I got to the hard part. I told them about October 14th, about the chaos, about the order I gave Gunnar, and about the 4 years he spent guarding the place where I had left their son. I apologized for the confusion and the forgotten command. Mr. Singh listened intently. When I finished, he didn't look angry or sad. He looked thoughtful. "Jake," he said softly, "you didn't fail. Gunnar didn't fail. You did exactly what our son asked you to do." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "When Singh left for his last deployment," Mrs. Singh began, her voice trembling slightly, "he gave us a letter. He told us if anything happened, we should read it, and we should know that his greatest comfort was his unit, and especially his friendship with the K9s. Mr. Singh went to a small mahogany cabinet and retrieved a simple, sealed envelope. He handed it to me. "He wrote this just before he deployed. He told us he was afraid of being left behind." I opened the letter. It was written in the same neat, precise hand as the notes I had found in my house, but softer, more personal. It was a letter to his parents, full of love and typical military assurances. But at the very end, there was a postscript, directed entirely at me, Jake, 4 years in the future. P.S. If something happens, tell Jake I need Gunnar to hold my spot. Tell him not to move. Gunnar knows what's important. I trust him to guard it until Jake gets back. I stared at the letter, the final chilling piece of the puzzle locking into place. Singh hadn't been killed before. Gunnar arrived. Singh had been placed behind the door, wounded, and he was the one who gave Gunnar the ultimate mission. In the brief, frantic moments of the firefight, As I was shoving Singh into the maintenance shed, Singh must have looked at Gunnar, recognized the imminent danger of the bomb, and, knowing his time was short, gave Gunnar the ultimate, silent, soldier-to-soldier command. Hold the line. Guard my spot. Gunnar wasn't obeying my forgotten command. He was honoring Singh's final wish. He was standing vigil, not because I told him to, but because his comrade asked him to, and he knew that post was vital to the end. The door wasn't the escape route. It wasn't the hiding spot for the chip. It was the final, sacred watch post. I realized then that the note writer, the silent ally, was probably Singh's direct K9 contact, who knew the depth of their bond and knew that Singh had entrusted Gunnar with the final mission. I handed the letter back to Mr. Singh, tears streaming down my face. I looked down at Gunnar, who was now resting his head on Mrs. Singh's knee, having finally fulfilled his 4-year promise. "Mission complete, buddy," I whispered for the last time. "You kept your word." Gunnar lifted his head, looked at me, and thumped his tail once against the carpet, the softest, most content sound I had ever heard. The warrior was finally at rest, his duty fully discharged, his honor absolute. We were home, and the weight of the war for both of us was finally gone. I spent the rest of the day with the Singhs, sharing memories and letting Gunnar provide silent comfort. When we finally left, driving back toward the airport, I knew there were no more mysteries left. The house in North Carolina was safe, the ghost was captured, and the debt was paid. The rest of the story is simple, and it's the best part. It's the story of quiet, domestic bliss. Gunnar lived for another 6 happy, spoiled years, basking in the North Carolina sun. He never blocked a doorway again, unless he was deliberately trying to trip me up to get attention. He learned to love Sarah, and when our first child arrived a few years later, Gunnar adopted the role of benevolent, protective uncle, guarding the crib with far less intensity but much more love than he ever guarded a maintenance shed. He taught me that sometimes the most rigid routines, the most frustrating behaviors, are just a soldier's desperate attempt to maintain integrity in a world that has gone mad. And that the only way to truly heal a heart burdened by war is not with forgetfulness, but with final, absolute closure. And every single night, exactly at 10:30 p.m., I would pause, look at the perfectly closed laundry room door, and whisper 2 words into the quiet house. All clear. And somewhere, deep in the house, Gunnar would respond with a soft, contented sigh. He was finally, truly safe. He was home. The dawn broke over North Carolina, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, a stark contrast to the harsh, fluorescent glare of the military debriefing that had just wrapped up in my living room. Ramirez was still there, sitting on the porch swing, nursing a coffee that was probably colder than the night air. The feds had taken the ghost, the chip, and most of my front yard as a temporary crime scene. The house was a mess. The mudroom was dusted with forensic powder. The laundry room door was splintered where the washing machine had rattled against. The frame and the kitchen floor still showed the faint, dark stain where the ghost had spat blood. But for the first time in 4 years, the air felt clean. The tension was gone. Ramirez looked at me, his eyes tired but clear. "You know, Jake, I've seen some things, but watching a retired K9 run a counterinsurgency operation in a suburban laundry room, that's a new one." I managed a weak smile. He just needed the right command, and the right target, and the right motivation, Ramirez added, finishing his coffee. "Singh." I nodded, the name hanging heavy between us. That's the piece I missed for 4 years. I thought I left him holding a door to protect my flank. I did, but I also left him guarding a man who was dying 10 feet away, a man he was explicitly ordered to protect. Ramirez stood up, stretching. "Well, he saved you, Jake. Twice. Once from the bomb, by holding his position and keeping the enemy focused on the comms shack, and again, last night, by keeping that key safe." We shook hands. Ramirez promised to keep me updated on the ghost and the chip, but we both knew the real work was done. He drove away, leaving me alone with the quiet aftermath. I walked back inside. Gunnar was stretched out on his favorite rug, not pacing, not twitching, but truly asleep. He was snoring softly, a deep, rumbling sound of utter relaxation. I knelt beside him and gently ran my hand over the scar tissue on his muzzle, the subtle marks he'd picked up over years of service. "I'm so sorry, buddy," I murmured, my voice thick. "I put you through hell. You didn't fail, Singh. You did everything right. Now you can finally rest." He didn't wake up, but he let out a heavy sigh, the kind that deflates the lungs completely, and nudged his head into my leg. It felt like an acceptance. The vigil was over, and the grief was shared. Over the next few weeks, the true adjustment began. The physical damage to the house was easily fixed. I replaced the washing machine, patched the drywall, and put a brand new solid wooden door on the laundry room. A door that was now just a door. But the change in Gunnar was the real repair work. The 10:30 p.m. deadline vanished entirely. The constant, low-level vigilance that had plagued him since we got home melted away. He started playing like a regular dog. He was no longer a soldier on perpetual standby. He was a very large, very happy German shepherd enjoying his retirement package. I started doing things I hadn't had the mental space for in years. I started dating again, meeting a local woman named Sarah who worked at the library. She loved Gunnar instantly, not as a hero but as a big, gentle, slightly clumsy dog who needed his ears scratched. But as peaceful as things were, the truth about the note writer, the silent ally who knew everything, always lingered in the back of my mind. It was the last unsolved thread, and it led me to wonder, if someone was watching Gunnar so closely, did they know something else about the night Singh died? Something even more personal than the bomb, or the ghost? I hadn't found the answer in the logs, or in the reports, or in the walls of my house. I realized that if I wanted the final piece of closure, I would have to go back to the source, to the only people who knew the full story of October 14th. I had to talk to Singh's family, not to tell them how he died, but to ask them about how he lived and why Gunnar's final desperate act was to stand guard over his memory. I found Specialist Singh's parents living in Arizona. I wrote them a long letter explaining who I was, who Gunnar was, and asking if I could visit. They agreed. A month later, Gunnar and I were on a plane, heading west. When we arrived at the Singh family home, Mr. and Mrs. Singh met us at the door. I introduced them to Gunnar, who, sensing their grief, acted with a quiet reverence. He simply sat beside Mrs. Singh, letting her stroke his massive head, offering silent comfort. We talked for hours about their son. Finally, I got to the hard part. I told them about October 14th, about the chaos, about the order I gave Gunnar, and about the 4 years he spent guarding the place where I had left their son. Mr. Singh listened intently. "Jake," he said softly, "you didn't fail. Gunnar didn't fail. You did exactly what our son asked you to do." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "When Singh left for his last deployment," Mrs. Singh explained, "he gave us a letter. He told us if anything happened, we should read it, and we should know that his greatest comfort was his unit, and especially his friendship with the K-9s. Mr. Singh retrieved a simple, sealed envelope and handed it to me. He wrote this just before he deployed. He told us he was afraid of being left behind." I opened the letter. It was written in the same neat, precise hand as the notes I had found in my house, but softer, more personal. After the usual assurances to his parents, there was a postscript directed entirely at me. P.S. If something happens, tell Jake I need Gunnar to hold my spot. Tell him not to move. Gunnar knows what's important. I trust him to guard it until Jake gets back. I stared at the letter, the final chilling piece of the puzzle locking into place. Singh hadn't been killed before. Gunnar arrived. Singh had been placed behind the door, wounded, and he was the one who gave Gunnar the ultimate mission. In the brief, frantic moments of the firefight, as I was shoving Singh into the maintenance shed, Singh must have looked at Gunnar, recognized the imminent danger of the bomb, and, knowing his time was short, gave Gunnar the ultimate, silent, soldier-to-soldier command. Hold the line. Guard my spot. Gunnar wasn't obeying my forgotten command. He was honoring Singh's final wish. He was standing vigil, not because I told him to, but because his comrade asked him to, and he knew that post was vital to the end. The door wasn't the escape route. It wasn't the hiding spot for the chip. It was the final, sacred watch post. I realized then that the note writer, the silent ally, was probably Singh's direct K9 contact, who knew the depth of their bond and knew that Singh had entrusted Gunnar with the final mission. That contact had honored both Singh's final wish and Gunnar's duty, first by hiding the chip and then by warning me, the clueless handler. I handed the letter back to Mr. Singh, tears streaming down my face. I looked down at Gunnar, who was now resting his head on Mrs. Singh's knee, having finally fulfilled his 4-year promise. "Mission complete, buddy," I whispered for the last time. "You kept your word." Gunnar lifted his head, looked at me, and thumped his tail once against the carpet. The softest, most content sound I had ever heard. The warrior was finally at rest, his duty fully discharged, his honor absolute. We were home, and the weight of the war, for both of us, was finally gone. Gunnar lived for another 6 happy, spoiled years, basking in the North Carolina sun. He never blocked a doorway again, unless he was deliberately trying to trip me up to get attention. He learned to love Sarah, and when our first child arrived a few years later, Gunnar adopted the role of benevolent, protective uncle, guarding the crib with far less intensity but much more love than he ever guarded a maintenance shed. He taught me that sometimes the most rigid routines, the most frustrating behaviors, are just a soldier's desperate attempt to maintain integrity in a world that has gone mad, and that the only way to truly heal a heart burdened by war is not with forgetfulness, but with final, absolute closure. And every single night, exactly at 10:30 p.m., I would pause, look at the perfectly closed laundry room door, and whisper 2 words into the quiet house. All clear. And somewhere deep in the house, Gunnar would respond with a soft, contented sigh. He was finally truly safe. He was home.